kind of chilly Saturday morning where the air feels sharp against your skin and the promise of warmth seems like a distant dream. I was already feeling the weight of the day, knowing that it was Maya's 10th birthday, and we were heading to my brother Matt's house for the celebration. I'd been looking forward to this day, but in the back of my mind, I also dreaded it. Maya and I had been through a lot over the past few years. Her father and I divorced, and we were now living in a cramped apartment in the city. It wasn't ideal, but it was home for the two of us. A home that, despite its imperfections, held a sense of security. Still, there were days when I'd take Maya back to my parents' house just for some peace. It was a big house, much too big for them, but it was familiar, even if it wasn't the easiest place to be. We arrived at Matt's house, and from the moment we stepped in, I could already feel the difference. My brother, the center of attention, greeted us with his usual loud, confident presence. He was the one who always seemed to get the attention, and with his wife Angela and their kids, Sophie and Max, trailing behind him, it was clear that nothing had changed. Sophie, the perfect student, the one who could do no wrong, was already talking about her latest achievements, while Max, the younger one, smiled with that easy confidence boys seem to carry like armor. Maya, on the other hand, was quieter. She knew her place in this family, had learned it long ago. Stay small, stay in the background, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get a moment where someone notices you. I watched Maya as she quietly sat on the floor, her legs crossed, waiting for her turn. I knew that look. It was the same one I used to wear when I was her age, hopeful but careful, trying to avoid disappointment. I could see it in her face as she watched Sophie and Max open their presents with excitement, their voices louder than anyone else's in the room. Maya smiled softly, but there was no real joy in it, just the kind of forced happiness kids learn when they know their own excitement won't make a difference. When it was finally time for Maya's gift, I saw her eyes widen just slightly, her breath catching in her throat, but she didn't show too much. She never did. She learned early on that showing too much meant being disappointed. Matt handed her a small, square package, and I saw the way her fingers hesitated before tearing into it. For a second, I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally get the attention she deserved. As the paper came off, I saw her blink in surprise. An iPad, not the newest model, but to Maya, it was everything. A real gift, just for her. She looked up at me with a question in her eyes, seeking permission to believe it. My heart swelled. I wanted to tell her it was okay to be happy, that she deserved this, but I had to swallow my emotions and smile back at her. I knew, though, that a small part of her wasn't sure if she could believe in it. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back the wrapping paper, the excitement on her face barely contained. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted so badly for this to be a moment of joy, a moment that she could hold on to and remember. The iPad she pulled out of the box wasn't the latest model or the kind that would make her classmates at school envious, but to her, it was everything. She looked up at me, her face filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you," she whispered softly, her voice so sincere it nearly broke me. I smiled and hugged her, not just for her sake, but for mine as well. She deserved to feel this happy. But as Maya eagerly examined the device, something didn't sit right with me. The box, it wasn't sealed properly. It was a bit worn around the edges, and the slight scuff marks on the surface were hard to ignore. It wasn't unusual for products to be refurbished, but this? It didn't feel like a brand new gift. But I kept my thoughts to myself, unwilling to spoil the moment for her. Maya, wrapped up in the excitement of receiving her first iPad, didn't notice any of the imperfections. Her fingers were already tracing the surface, eagerly anticipating the setup screen. But that's when the first odd thing happened. The device didn't show the usual greeting screen, the hello in different languages. Instead, the home screen popped up right away. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe it was a glitch, maybe something else, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. Maya didn't seem to mind. She was too busy with her newfound treasure. "Is it already on?" she asked, blinking at the screen as if she'd just missed something. "Weird," I muttered, trying to brush it off, but my mind was racing. I glanced at my family, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something flash across my mother's face, something between nervousness and guilt. I quickly pushed it away, telling myself it was just my imagination. I leaned in closer to the screen, trying to figure out what was going on. And then, before I could stop it, a notification popped down from the top of the screen. Maya, ever curious, leaned in too. "What's that, Mom?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent interest. My blood ran cold as I glanced at the words on the screen, the words that didn't belong on a child's iPad. It wasn't a generic alert, not a random message. It was a thread of messages from someone named Rachel, a name I didn't recognize. The words that appeared made my heart race, and not in the excited way it should have. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe for a moment as I read the messages. My mind screamed that something was wrong, but I forced myself to stay calm. I smiled at Maya, though I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Don't worry about it, sweetie," I said, trying to sound casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Let's go upstairs and finish setting it up, okay?" I knew this wasn't just a mistake. There was something else going on here, something darker that I wasn't ready to confront, not in front of Maya. She nodded and followed me upstairs, her excitement still bright, but now tinged with uncertainty. She opened the iPad, her eyes widening when she saw the sleek device in her hands. I watched her face as she turned it over, feeling her joy like a knife in my chest. This was supposed to be a happy moment for her, but instead, it felt like a trap. As Maya turned the iPad over in her hands, I tried to keep my thoughts steady, to hold on to the calm I was desperately trying to project. But inside, everything felt like it was unraveling. Maya was still so young, so trusting, and I knew this moment meant more to her than it should have. She deserved better than to have her happiness tied to something so tainted. But she didn't know that yet. She didn't know what was coming next. She sat on the edge of the bed, the iPad still resting in her lap, and I saw her face change from excited curiosity to quiet confusion. "Why is there stuff on here already?" she asked, her voice hesitant. It was the question I had been avoiding, the one I had hoped she wouldn't ask. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced a smile. "It's probably refurbished, honey," I said, trying to sound casual, like this was just another one of those things that happened with electronics. "It's still brand new, just reset." Maya nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't convinced, and neither was I. I sat beside her, trying to look over her shoulder at the screen. I told myself I wouldn't go digging. I told myself I'd just let this be. But as she pressed the home button again, I couldn't help myself. The screen flickered for a moment before a series of messages began to pop up in the corner. Messages that made my blood run cold. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. There were threads, long ones, stretching down the list, all from the same person, Rachel. My stomach dropped as I read the words. Nasty insults, bullying, taunts. They were aimed at a girl from Maya's school. A girl named Rachel. The same Rachel who had disappeared from school mid-year. The same Rachel who now seemed to have vanished entirely. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't want to make sense of it. How could this have happened? Why would someone put these messages on a device intended for a child? The worst part? I recognized the name Rachel from the whispers at school. She had been the subject of hushed conversations among the parents, the teachers. The rumors were dark, but nothing had prepared me for this. I kept my gaze on Maya, who was still looking at the iPad, trying to piece it all together in her innocent way. "Is this the person who was messaging you?" she asked, her eyes wide with confusion. She didn't understand. Not yet. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. "No, sweetie. This is a mix-up. It's probably nothing." I wanted to say so much more, wanted to shield her from this awful truth, but I couldn't. Not yet. I set the iPad down gently on the bed, my fingers brushing the screen like it might somehow bite me. "Sweetie, why don't you go brush your teeth?" I said, my voice softer than I intended. "We'll finish setting it up in just a minute. I promise." Maya hesitated for a moment, the kind of hesitation that made my heart break. She wanted to believe me, but she could see the change in my face. The fear. The concern. "Okay," she said finally, and padded off to the bathroom, still holding on to the iPad like it was a piece of magic. The second she was out of the room, I grabbed the device again, my hands shaking. I had to know more. I couldn't leave it like this, couldn't let this slide under the surface and hope it would go away. I scrolled through the messages again, my eyes darting over the cruel words, the pictures, the media files that made my stomach churn. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. Someone in this house had given Maya a phone that was filled with someone else's cruelty. I could feel the rage building inside me, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. There were too many questions. How had this happened? And why had my family, the people I trusted most, handed this to my daughter? They knew. They had to have known. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to think clearly. I needed to protect Maya. I couldn't do that by panicking. But in that moment, all I could think was, how could they do this to her? I sat there, holding the iPad in my hands, my mind racing with every possible scenario, each worse than the last. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that my family didn't know what they were handing me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that couldn't be true. They had to have known. They had to have seen the signs, heard the rumors, or at the very least, understood the weight of what they were giving Maya. They had to. And yet here I was, holding this device, this piece of evidence, that they had put in my daughter's hands without a second thought. I could hear Maya's footsteps in the hallway as she brushed her teeth, the sound so innocent, so unaware of the storm that was brewing just a few feet away. My heart twisted in my chest. This was supposed to be her birthday, a simple, happy day. Instead, it was quickly turning into something I never expected, something I couldn't unsee or ignore. My hands shook as I tapped through the messages again, trying to make sense of them, trying to piece together what had happened. The messages were cruel, repeated insults, hateful words, targeting a girl who had already been through enough. But what truly terrified me wasn't just the words themselves. It was the pattern, the persistence. Someone had been at this for a while, tormenting Rachel, breaking her down, and now Maya's name had been brought into it, not by accident, but as part of a cruel, deliberate plan. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my palms into them, willing the images to disappear. But they didn't. I could still see the photos, the disturbing videos that had been stored on this device, things no child should ever have to encounter. And yet, Maya was sitting downstairs, completely unaware that this iPad wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon. I had to protect her. I couldn't let her use this thing, this vile object, not when I knew what it held. But what was I supposed to do? How could I face my family? How could I confront them, knowing they had knowingly handed me something that was filled with someone else's abuse? The thoughts were spiraling, but I couldn't afford to lose control. I forced myself to put the iPad down gently, to take a deep breath and gather myself before I went downstairs. I needed answers. I needed to know if they knew. I needed to understand how my family, the people I had trusted, could do something like this. I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me, and walked to the door. I had to face them. I couldn't stay silent anymore, not when Maya's safety, her happiness, her well-being was at stake. I knew it was going to be difficult, that they'd try to downplay it, to make excuses. But I also knew that I couldn't let them sweep this under the rug. This was bigger than any holiday or family gathering. This was about protecting my daughter. Maya came out of the bathroom, her face bright and eager, completely unaware of the dark cloud hanging over us. "What's wrong, Mom?" she asked, her voice small, as she looked at my face, probably sensing the shift in my energy. I smiled at her, though it felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. "Nothing, sweetheart," I said, my voice a little too calm. "Let's go downstairs. We need to talk to Grandma and Grandpa for a minute." She nodded, trusting me completely. I took her hand and walked with her down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As we descended the stairs, I felt Maya's small hand in mine, warm and comforting, though it wasn't enough to steady the storm brewing in my chest. I glanced down at her, watching her skip ahead, oblivious to the tension in the air. She was so trusting, so innocent in her excitement. I wanted to shield her from everything, especially from the darkness that had crept into this day. But I knew I couldn't protect her forever. Not from this. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear the hum of conversation in the living room. It sounded normal, too normal. My parents were talking, laughing even, as if nothing had shifted, as if everything was just as it should be. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it definitely wasn't that. I walked into the living room with Maya trailing behind me, her curiosity piqued by my sudden change in demeanor. My mother turned to greet us, her smile warm but the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "What's going on, sweetie?" she asked, the question far too casual for the moment. I stood still for a moment, trying to calm the rapid beat of my heart. I could feel the weight of the truth in the pit of my stomach. Everything was going to change, and it was all coming from this single moment. The thing was, I didn't even know how to begin. How do you confront the people you've always relied on, the people who should have been protecting your child, about something as deep and damaging as this? "Maya and I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. My father looked up, his eyes narrowing just slightly. He was always the quiet one, the one who never said much, but when he did, it was usually with a weight that made you listen. I could feel him calculating, trying to read the room, trying to piece together what was happening, but I wasn't going to give him time to make excuses. I turned to Maya, who had sat down on the couch beside my mother, her little fingers still clutching the iPad. The moment felt like it stretched on for an eternity. I could see the excitement still lingering in her face, the hope that this birthday would be something special. But the deeper she looked into me, the more she saw the storm I was hiding. She could sense the shift, the change in energy. "Mom, is something wrong?" she asked, her voice quiet, vulnerable. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to look her in the eyes. "No, sweetie. Everything is fine, but I need you to trust me, okay?" I smiled at her, though the smile didn't quite reach my eyes. She nodded, as if everything I said was still gospel, still trustworthy. I turned to my parents, and it felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. "You gave Maya a phone with someone else's secrets on it, someone else's cruelty, and I need to know why." The words were out before I could stop them, and once they were spoken, the air shifted. It wasn't just a casual question. It was an accusation. I could see my parents' faces fall. My mother's eyes went wide with something close to shock, but my father's expression was unreadable. It was like he had been bracing for something, and now that the words were out, he was trying to contain the weight of it all. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The kind that fills a room and presses down on you like 1,000 pounds. I could hear my own breath, shallow and uneven, as I waited for a response that I knew wasn't going to come easily. Finally, my mother spoke, but her voice was strained, careful. "Kate, I don't know what you're talking about. That phone was a gift, just like the others. It's just an iPad, honey. There's nothing wrong with it." But I wasn't fooled. I had already seen the messages, the photos, the vile things that were meant to stay buried. I wasn't going to let her hide behind excuses anymore. "No," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I had just uncovered. "It's not just an iPad, Mom. It's full of hate, and you knew it. You knew exactly what you were doing when you gave it to her. Don't lie to me. Don't try to cover it up. Maya deserves better than this. We both do." My father shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, and I could see him glance at my mother, as if seeking her approval on how to respond. But there was no backing out of this. The truth had already been laid bare. "Well, maybe we didn't think it would escalate like this," my father finally said, his voice low and slow. "But it was just supposed to be a gift for Maya. She needed a phone." I shook my head, the disbelief settling deeper in my bones. "A gift? You gave her someone else's mistake. Someone else's mess, a phone that should have been wiped clean." "A phone with messages from Rachel? Do you even know who Rachel is?" "She's the girl from Maya's school, the one who disappeared. And you handed me that phone like it was nothing." Maya's eyes flickered between us, confusion still clouding her face. But something had shifted in her, too. She was starting to realize that the world around her wasn't as safe as she had thought. My heart broke a little more. "We didn't know," my mother whispered, but the guilt in her voice was impossible to ignore. "We didn't know it would be like this, Kate. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough." I felt the weight of my words hang in the air, suffocating the space between us. The silence that followed was thick, pressing down on me with the force of something I couldn't escape. Maya's confused eyes, flickering from my face to my parents, were enough to break me. She didn't understand why everything had suddenly changed. She was still clutching the iPad in her lap, her fingers nervously tapping against the screen as though the device might somehow offer her an answer, an explanation for all of this. I could feel my mother's gaze on me, her eyes shifting uneasily as she searched for something to say, some way to fix it, but the words wouldn't come. And honestly, they didn't deserve to. They didn't deserve to be the ones to calm me, to convince me that they hadn't known. Because I knew. I knew the truth, and the truth was that this wasn't a simple mistake. This wasn't just a mix-up or miscommunication. This was calculated, and they had handed Maya the broken pieces of someone else's pain without a second thought. I tried to swallow the rage that was building in my chest, but it was impossible. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice sharper than I intended. You gave her this phone because you didn't want to deal with it. You didn't want to deal with the fact that this is a real issue, that Rachel's life isn't something you just sweep under the rug. But you handed it to Maya anyway. And now she's the one who has to carry this. She's the one who will remember this day for the rest of her life. Maya's face was still full of confusion, but now it was mixed with something else. Hurt. She was starting to understand. Starting to see that the adults in her life weren't always the safe harbor she thought they were. And that hurt me more than I could ever say. We didn't think it would be this bad, Kate, my father said quietly, almost like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. We just thought it was a simple gift, something to make her happy. She's been asking for one for months. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I stared at him, my anger a cold weight in my chest. You didn't think it would be this bad? You knew the girl on that phone had been bullied. You knew that Rachel had been suffering at school, and you didn't think it would be this bad? You thought you could just give Maya a phone, let her walk around with someone else's trauma, and it wouldn't matter? You thought you could just pass that responsibility off to her? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the shaking in my hands betrayed the calm I was trying to project. I wasn't calm. I was furious. Furious at how they had handled this, at how they had taken no responsibility for their actions, at how they had let me down in the worst way possible. I wasn't just angry with them for giving Maya the phone. I was angry because I had always trusted them. I had always believed that no matter how difficult things got, they would protect Maya, that they would protect me. But now, here I was, standing in front of them, holding the broken pieces of a family I no longer recognized. Why? I asked, my voice cracking for the first time, the weight of everything settling in. Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you tell me what you were handing me? You knew this wasn't just a gift. You knew what was inside, and you gave it to Maya anyway. They looked at each other, and I could see the guilt in their eyes. My mother, usually so composed, looked lost, like she didn't know how to fix this anymore. She had never been the kind of person who admitted when she was wrong, and I wasn't sure if that moment would ever come. I didn't think it would matter this much, she said, her voice small now, as if she was trying to justify her actions to herself. We just wanted to make her happy. We didn't think it would cause so much trouble. Maya stood up slowly, the iPad still in her hands, her face crumpled with emotion. Mom? She asked, her voice tiny, unsure. What's happening? I turned to her, kneeling down to her level, taking her face in my hands. I couldn't lie to her anymore. It's okay, baby, I said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. I paused, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. I just need you to trust me, okay? We're going to fix this, I promise. Maya nodded, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Is the iPad broken? She asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, my heart breaking for her. No, sweetie, it's not broken, but we're going to make sure it's safe. You don't need to worry about it. As I stood up, I realized that everything had changed. I wasn't just protecting Maya from the phone anymore. I was protecting her from a family that had failed her. And that was something I couldn't ignore, something I couldn't just move past. The damage had been done, but this was where I took control. This was where I drew the line. The conversation wasn't over. It had barely begun. But I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. I could feel the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders as I stood there, looking at my family, at the people I had once relied on for support and guidance. But now, it was different. I couldn't trust them. Not like I used to. Not when they had handed my daughter a phone filled with someone else's pain, someone else's cruelty. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Anger, betrayal, sadness, they all swirled together inside me, but none of them made sense. Maya, still clutching the iPad, sat quietly on the couch, her wide eyes darting between me and my parents, trying to understand why everything was suddenly different. I could see the confusion on her face, the way she was trying to make sense of the situation. I wanted to protect her from this. I wanted to shield her from the ugliness of what had just happened, but I couldn't. The truth was too big, too real. I turned back to my parents. My mother had sat down, her hands folded in her lap, and my father stood in the corner, his back slightly hunched, his eyes avoiding mine. They looked small now, diminished, like the parents I had once looked up to were no longer the people I thought they were. The facade was gone. They weren't the people who would step in front of a bullet for me. They were just two people who had made an unforgivable mistake. And in doing so, they had dragged Maya into something that wasn't hers to carry. "I'm not going to pretend that this doesn't matter," I said, my voice firm despite the tremble in my hands. "I'm not going to sweep this under the rug like you're trying to do. I'm done with that." My mother opened her mouth as if to protest, but I raised a hand, stopping her before she could say anything. "No, don't. You don't get to explain this away. Not this time. You knew. You knew what was on that phone, and you gave it to her anyway." The silence that followed felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't sure what kind of response I expected, but when it came, it wasn't what I thought it would be. My father spoke, his voice low, almost apologetic. "Kate, we didn't know it would be like this. We thought it would just be a nice gift for Maya, something she'd be happy with." A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I forced it down. "A gift? You think this was a gift?" I shook my head, the disbelief still sharp in my chest. "You gave her a device filled with someone else's torment. How is that a gift? What were you thinking?" My father's eyes hardened, his mouth set in a tight line. "We didn't mean for any of this to happen. It wasn't intentional." "Of course it wasn't intentional," I shot back, my voice sharp now. "But that doesn't matter, does it? The fact is, you didn't care enough to check. You didn't care enough to ask the hard questions. You just handed her a phone because it was easy, because it was convenient." I could feel the tears burning in the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had no more room for grief, no more space to pretend like everything would be okay. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about protecting my daughter, protecting her from the lies, the secrets, and the damage that had been done. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done pretending like everything's fine. I'm done pretending like we're still a family that works. Because we're not. You gave me that phone, and I can't unsee what's on it. I can't unhear the things that were said, and I won't let you brush it off as nothing." Maya, still sitting on the couch, looked up at me, her face pale, her lips trembling slightly. She didn't fully understand everything that was happening, but she knew something had changed. She knew that the people she had trusted weren't the ones she thought they were. I walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the couch, and wrapped my arms around her. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, my voice cracking. "We're going to be okay, I promise." She leaned into me, her small body trembling as I held her close. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just needed me to be there. And for once, I wasn't going to fail her. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked at my parents one last time. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady. "Maya and I are leaving. We're not coming back here. Not until things change." I saw the shock in their eyes, but I didn't wait for them to respond. I couldn't wait for them to apologize or justify what they had done. I had made my decision. The weight of their actions wasn't something I could carry any longer. I grabbed Maya's hand, and together we walked out the door, the sound of the Christmas music still playing softly in the background, but it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't the family I had hoped for, but it was the family I had now, and I was going to do everything in my power to protect it. We left my parents' house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally making the right choice. The drive away from my parents' house was a quiet one, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with all the things I couldn't say, all the things I didn't know how to explain to Maya. She was sitting in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes staring out the window, watching the world pass by, but not really seeing it. She had gone from confused to anxious, her usual energy replaced by a quiet tension I wasn't used to. I could feel her processing everything, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We hadn't said much to each other since we left. Maya had asked me if we were okay, if we were going somewhere fun, and I had reassured her the best I could. "We're going to a friend's house," I said, my voice a little too bright. "Just for a little while. We need a break, that's all." She had nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. She didn't know the details, and I wasn't about to give them to her. Not yet. I had to shield her from the weight of it all for a little longer. This wasn't a burden she needed to carry. When we finally pulled into Sandra's driveway, I was grateful for the quiet refuge she offered. Sandra had been my best friend for years, and even though I hadn't planned on showing up unannounced, she was the one person I knew wouldn't ask a lot of questions, wouldn't push for answers before I was ready. Maya perked up when she saw Sandra's front door open, and as soon as we stepped out of the car, Sandra appeared, her warm smile greeting us. "Hey, you two," she said, stepping forward to give me a hug. "Come on in. I've got hot chocolate, and Maya, I think there's something in the fridge you might like." Maya's face lit up, her tension easing just a little. The comfort of familiar faces, the simplicity of Sandra's kindness, was the balm we both needed. Sandra led us inside, and I could already feel my shoulders relaxing, the pressure of the last few hours lifting bit by bit. I watched as Maya scampered off to the kitchen, her curiosity leading her straight to the fridge, while I stayed in the living room, staring blankly at the walls. Sandra sat down beside me, her expression a mixture of concern and understanding. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She knew. She could always tell when I needed someone to just listen without pushing me for answers. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly, her voice low. I shook my head, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. "Not yet," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I just need to let Maya feel safe right now. I can't explain it all to her, not until I know what to do." Sandra nodded, her hand resting gently on mine. "You don't have to do it all at once. You're doing the best you can." I let out a long, shaky breath, the weight of the day catching up with me all at once. My hands were still trembling, but for the first time in a while, I felt a small flicker of something resembling relief. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what came next. But I had made the decision to protect Maya, to remove her from a situation that was beyond repair, even if that meant taking a step back from my own family. "I thought I could trust them," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I thought they would always have her back, but they didn't. They gave her that phone. They put her in harm's way, and now I have to clean up their mess." Sandra squeezed my hand, offering silent support. She didn't need to say anything else. I knew she understood. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of my emotions gradually lightening as I let myself lean on someone who wasn't trying to fix things, just be there. And for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. Maya returned from the kitchen, a cup of hot chocolate in her hands, her smile a little more genuine now. "Mom, can we watch a movie?" she asked, her voice still soft, but there was a spark of her old self in it. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady now, the tears held back by sheer force of will. I took the cup of hot chocolate from her hands, offering a smile that didn't feel forced, and we settled in together on the couch. For now, that was enough. Just being together, just finding comfort in the quiet. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own decisions to be made. But tonight, I was choosing peace. For Maya, for me, and for the new beginning we had ahead of us. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes your family might hand you a phone full of someone else's drama. But here's the thing. Trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never be afraid to walk away from toxic situations, even if it's uncomfortable. Life's too short for unnecessary stress, so choose your battles wisely. And if you've learned anything today, let it be this: always check your devices before gifting them. If this story resonated with you, or you just enjoy a good family drama, hit that subscribe button. You never know what wisdom or chaos we'll share next. Stay tuned in the comments.